September 1978. 15-year-old Mary Vincent had run away from home and found herself hitchhiking along California's endless stretch of Interstate 5. The highway cut through miles of open land, dry and indifferent, a place where cars passed quickly and strangers rarely asked questions. Mary was young, vulnerable, and alone in a way that only a runaway teenager can be. She believed she could handle herself. She believed she could make it north. At one point, she was standing with two other hitchhikers when a blue van pulled over. The man behind the wheel introduced himself as Lawrence Singleton. He said he only had room for one passenger. The other hitchhikers immediately felt uneasy. They warned Mary not to get in. Something about him didn't feel right. But Mary, determined and perhaps tired of waiting, ignored their warnings and climbed into the van. That single decision would lead her into a nightmare few could survive. At first, the ride seemed ordinary. The van moved steadily down the highway, the hum of tires against asphalt filling the silence. Exhausted from days on the road, Mary eventually fell asleep. When she opened her eyes again, everything had changed. It was dark. The van was no longer heading in the direction she expected. Instead, it was moving toward a remote, isolated area far from the highway lights. Panic set in immediately. Mary demanded that Singleton stop the vehicle and let her out. The van eventually pulled over on a deserted road. The moment she stepped outside, hoping to escape, Singleton attacked her with a hammer. The blow was sudden and brutal. Mary lost consciousness. When she came to, she was in the back of the van, bound and helpless. The hours that followed were the darkest of her life. Singleton subjected her to horrific abuse, isolating her in a place where no one could hear her screams. Then the violence escalated to an almost unimaginable level. After assaulting her, Singleton took an axe and severed both of Mary's arms below the elbows. The act was calculated, savage, and meant to ensure she would not survive. Believing she would bleed to death, he dragged her body to the edge of a steep embankment, about 30 feet down, and threw her over, leaving her broken in the darkness. But what happened next defied every expectation, including Singleton's. Mary Vincent did not die. Alone at the bottom of that ravine, 15 years old and bleeding heavily, she faced a reality that should have ended her life within minutes. Instead, instinct took over. Fighting shock and unimaginable pain, Mary pressed mud into her wounds to slow the bleeding. It was a desperate, primal act of survival. Inch by inch, using what remained of her arms and the strength in her legs, she climbed back up the steep embankment. The climb alone would have been grueling for someone uninjured. For a teenage girl who had just lost both arms, it was almost beyond comprehension. Reaching the road was only the beginning. Naked, covered in blood, and barely conscious, Mary began walking along the highway. For approximately 3 miles, she moved forward step by step in the darkness. Cars passed. Headlights flashed by. Some drivers may not have seen her clearly. Others may have been too afraid to stop. Each passing vehicle was another test of endurance. Finally, a driver pulled over. That single act of humanity saved her life. Emergency services were called, and Mary was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked urgently to stabilize her. Against all odds, she survived. The investigation quickly focused on Lawrence Singleton. Mary, despite her trauma and injuries, provided a clear description of her attacker. Her testimony became central to the case. In court, she faced the man who had tried to erase her from existence. She stood, without arms but unbroken, and identified him. Her presence in that courtroom was powerful, undeniable. The jury convicted Singleton of attempted murder, rape, kidnapping, and other charges. Yet the sentencing exposed a harsh reality within the justice system at the time. Because of legal limitations in California law, Singleton received a sentence of just 14 years in prison. With credit for good behavior, he was released in 1987 after serving only 8 years. For Mary, the sentence felt like a second blow. The man who had inflicted unimaginable suffering would one day walk free. The public reacted with outrage. Laws were criticized. Questions were raised about how such brutality could result in what many saw as a lenient punishment. But while debates continued, Mary focused on something else entirely: rebuilding her life. Recovery was long and painful, both physically and emotionally. Mary was fitted with prosthetic arms. She endured surgeries, rehabilitation, and the daily challenge of learning to live in a body forever changed. Many people in her position might have retreated from the world. Mary did the opposite. She testified publicly, spoke about survival, and refused to be defined solely by what had been done to her. She learned to paint using her prosthetics. She married. She became a mother. Each milestone was a quiet declaration that Lawrence Singleton had failed. Years later, Singleton would commit another murder in Florida after his release, reinforcing the fears many had expressed when he left prison. But Mary Vincent's story does not end with him. It transcends him. What remains most powerful is not the violence he committed, but the resilience she embodied. Mary Vincent entered that blue van as a runaway teenager searching for direction. She emerged from the nightmare as something far more enduring, a symbol of survival against overwhelming odds. Her story forces us to confront both the depths of human cruelty and the extraordinary strength of the human will. She lost her arms, but she did not lose herself. She was meant to die in silence at the bottom of a ravine. Instead, she climbed out, walked into history, and turned a story of attempted annihilation into one of defiance and life.